works for the public library, and I found out about Emergency Operations Center from just accidentally, and I went, oh wow, we've got to get a program about that. And so I was referred to Andrew, who also likes Doctor who I like. So we knew it would be a great speaker. So Andrew, why don't you just fill us in with what you want to tell us about Emergency Operations Center and FEMA and whatever else you want to do.
Sure. And this is the perfect size group. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. I can assure you that the emergency operations is a labyrinth of bureaucracy, and it is just as confusing when you're in it as when you're looking at it from the outside. So yeah, I have been for the past, 2 months or so, the Deputy Section Chief of the Planning Section of the Emergency Operations Center in Rochester. And it's definitely a change from what I usually do. I'm the Circulation Services Manager at the Rochester Public Library. So I'm in charge of fines, registrations. Oh, I'm not in charge of fines anymore. We don't have fines anymore. I'm in charge of registrations, reshelving, overdues, probably something else. Reserves. I'm also in charge of reserves. But I haven't been at the library very much, so it's going to be really difficult when I get back there to remember what I'm supposed to be doing. But so the Emergency Operations Center is something that is part of the FEMA NIMS program. So NIMS is the National Incident Management System, and it is designed to have communication between different jurisdictions and different first responders. So during 9/11, they noticed that one of the big barriers for them responding to that is every first responder had a different system that they were using. It was really hard to communicate. They even had codes that meant something different, maybe for a ambulance, fire department, and police. So they needed to create something that would allow people to communicate a lot easier. And that's what NIMS came in, the National Incident Management System. And it got changed up a bit after Katrina in 2008. And I am betting, again, it will get a change up after COVID, because the thing about NIMS is that it is really, really good if you have a disaster that is like a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even a month or so long. But for the length of time that we're talking with COVID here, I mean, our EOC is still stood up or still active. It's just been right-sized for what we're dealing with right now. So I'm guessing that they're going to put some stuff in there about how better to handle a longer term situation, because some of its flaws are a little bit evident, or at least for someone who's not as familiar with it as other people, I could see that there was a little bit of a flaw here and there. So if you like acronyms, you really should go into disaster management. There are literally 13 pages of acronyms just for the for FEMA and NIMS. 13 pages. And whenever you're learning a new skill or you're learning a new job, as soon as you get the lingo down, you feel like you've crossed a huge hurdle. Like, finally, I understand what people are saying sometimes. I can remember maybe 8 to 10 of these acronyms at any one time. And I also, at the library world, I mean, we have pages and pages of acronyms too. So it is daunting just trying to get this stuff down to enough that when you're reading through people's plans, a lot of it is in acronyms and that kind of thing. And as a planning section chief, one of the things that we would do is anytime someone would come up with a plan, they would send it to us, we would look through it, and we would say, yeah, it looks good. So I can't say something looks good unless I can actually read it. So the 13 pages of acronyms online was very helpful to me. Like, one of the things that we got a lot of was SOPs. And I didn't know what an SOP was when I started. I felt sheepish asking because everyone else seemed to know what an SOP was. And it means standard operating procedure. And at the library, we would have called it like a cheat sheet or a help sheet or something like that. So it was not familiar to me, but after I got used to it, I was like, okay, I know what a standard operating procedure is now. But now people just say SOP, and I just know what it means. I don't remember always what the letters stand for. but 13 pages. How did I get involved in this? I am, one of my hats that I wear at the library is I am on the city safety committee, and I helped create the library's disaster plan. And because of that, I had the rarefied pleasure of taking the ICS classes from FEMA. ICS means Incident Management System, or Incident Communication System. See, even when I have them written down in front of me, it's hard for me to remember all the acronyms. But I took those classes. It's almost been 10 years now. I got some certificates, which is always nice when you take a class. But it's, let's see, this one was from May of 2011 and February of 2011 is when I took my FEMA classes. Does anybody know John Hunziger? He was in my class. If you know John, you know that going through a class with John is always a fun experience. So, but because of the ICS classes, I also got trained in something called DLAN, or Disaster Local Area Network. And that is the software and the archiving thing that we use to keep track of our paperwork during COVID thing. Now, I'd had a little training with it, and the way it's designed is you have an issue, you have all of this stuff like just set up and ready to go. But unfortunately, every single disaster is kind of unique. And when you go into one of these disasters, like the paperwork that you want to use and the things you want to use, you have to craft them a little bit. So when we got started, we had to basically create all of the forms that we were going to use for the COVID process. And it was kind of a heavy lift at first. And we I will say, weren't completely sold on the Disasterland product. So we did it some other ways. We did some workarounds, but now we have it down so that forms fill out automatically, data is entered automatically. And once we really got working on it, it works great. And the next disaster that we're activated for, it'll go even better. I also do COOP planning, or continuity of operations planning. So if your building is damaged and you're going to be out of commission for a couple of days, you're going to use your building emergency response plan. If your building is damaged and you're going to be down for weeks to months, that's when you go into a continuity of operations plan, where you think of ways that you can operate perhaps off-site, creative ways that you can operate. Like at the library right now, we have our curbside service, and we have internet by appointment, that sort of thing. So we are providing all of the services that we talk about in our EOP, or Emergency Operations Plan, as our core services. I also have built a lot of relationships with the Rochester Police Department and Rochester Fire Department over the years. Originally, when I started in the EOC, I was supposed to be head of documentation, but thanks to John Turk, he saw my name on the list, and one of the section heads got moved to a different section. So he saw my name on the list, he knew me, and he said, well, let's have him be the other section chief. So thanks to John, that is actually how I got to be a deputy section chief of the planning section. So when you get activated, the first thing I noticed is how different my schedule looked. This is my schedule before I was activated, and this is my schedule after I was activated. Now you might think, well, your schedule doesn't look too bad, but when you look at the schedule, this thing that right here on this old one that says schedule, this was time I set aside to build my weekly schedule. This is a meeting, this is a meeting, and then this is time that I put on my schedule to actually do a review, like write it up and stuff. Now, if you look at this schedule, every single one of these is a meeting that I need to be at. And if you'll notice this time right here, there are 3 that I need to be at all at the same time. And every single one of these meetings means I get assigned tasks that I don't have all that much time to do. So when you're in a EOC type of thing, you got to learn really quickly how, like, to look at these meetings and say, well, I can't do all 3 of these. This one's the priority. Can I have someone else go to this other one for me? One of my first weeks, I was like, 2 meetings at the same time, I can do that. I'll have one on my phone and I'll have the other on my laptop. It'll be just fine. And the first time I did it, it was great. I was able to take notes effectively between the meetings, and I was able to just keep up, and everything was just great. The second time it happened, people were asking me questions in both meetings at the same time, and they, you know, I had my camera on too, so they could tell that something was up. Like, why isn't he getting back to us? We can see these right there. So the second time I tried it, it did not work at all. The system fell apart, and I was like, no, I'm going to have other people cover these for me. And that's when I learned that you really have to learn to trust your people really quickly. The section that I am in, the planning section, most of these people are folks that I had never worked with before. I had met Holly and John, the 2 other section chiefs. We met ahead of time and got to know each other a little bit. And then because of social distancing, we realized that we weren't going to be able to actually meet at the EOC. There's an actual emergency operations center. It is in the basement of Fire Station 2, which is the one out by Century High School. And I was going to try to get pictures of it, but there aren't very many pictures of it, and it's really not that exciting. It's just a bunch of tables on wheels that we can move together in little clusters so we can talk to each other. So no pictures, but let me assure you, it's very boring. So yeah, you got to learn to trust your folks really quickly. So we learned to have people go to meetings for us when we needed to and report back and that kind of thing. I was really impressed with all the folks that we worked with. They came together really quickly as a team. They were really technologically competent. And if we asked them to do something, they delivered every single time. And our success as a planning department is definitely because of all the people in the planning department. So this is what an EOC looks like. There's an incident commander, and that's Eric Kurska of the fire department. He's the unified command for the COVID-19. There's public information officers. We have a whole section of public information officers. There's a safety officer, that's Jason Bloom, who's HR in the city. We don't have a liaison officer. I'm not, usually this would be a liaison between like other, like the county or the state or the federal level. But because all of us are active at the same time, we don't really need to liaise. We just go to each other's meetings. This was me, planning section. And originally I was going to be documentation lead, but then I got moved up to the top spot, which is great because the things that we had the documentation folks do, I wouldn't have had any idea how to do. So putting me into a leadership role worked out for me, and it worked out for them too. Each disaster looks a little bit different. So for COVID-19, one of the things that we knew we needed to really concentrate on was health and human services. That would normally go under operations here, but because it was such a huge need, we actually separated it out and had our own health and human services section. And that worked out really well. They're also still active right now. They're running the day center for folks experiencing homelessness, and that is at the Mayo Civic Center. I just got trained in there because I am going to be a manager on duty in a little bit to help them out with some capacity issues. They also were helping with food drops, and they're still helping with people experiencing food stability issues. The other really cool thing is that more funding was activated because of COVID, and the counties had a lot of luck housing people. So that's really cool. And that's partially because the day center, they're able to go in and they are able to have social workers there, and they're able to really find out programs that people are going through. And as I understand it, they just signed the leases on 2 more buildings that they're going to have. We're going to be able to get a lot of people housed. So that's really exciting. So this is what we would put together, what the planning team actually did. We would run meetings. We ran daily sit reps, situation reports, and we also ran twice a week emergency action briefings. So this was an emergency action briefing. The sit reps were designed for when a shift ends, the sit rep would inform the folks what you were working on that day and what they need to concentrate on. A action plan briefing says basically, this is what we accomplished this week, this is what we're going to try to accomplish in the next week. So they feel similar for something like COVID, but they're very different if you were doing with something like a tornado, where you're probably only going to be around for like 3 days. The other thing is, you might ask, why were there 3 section chiefs? Well, when we were originally activated, we had to plan to have someone active at all times. So we planned to be active 24/7. Luckily, we didn't have to do that. Extra super lucky, because it was really hard keeping up with everything that we needed to pull information from with 3 of us. There's a lot of meetings. I mean, the first couple of weeks, I was still doing library stuff. I have this EOC stuff. It was basically like having to do 2 full-time jobs at the same time. But instead of having 16 hours to do 2 full-time jobs, you had 10 hours to do 16 hours worth of work in. So it was a lot at first, but once we got into it, once we got into the swing of it, it got a lot better. And now, I should say, now, as of last week, I am not active in the EOC anymore. I'm not fully active, I should say. I get to go to a couple of meetings every week, but it's mostly just in case we get reactivated. But this is the actual PowerPoint I used, where I presented to the mayor. I figured if it was good enough for the mayor, it was good enough for you guys, so I left the typos in and everything. People would send us reports, and so we would have to collect those reports and put them together into a readable format. And the difficult thing about that is we have to put it into a readable, presentable format very quickly. John and Holly were much better at it than me. Every single time while I was giving the presentation, I'd be like, oh man, I got a typo right there. And people would laugh, and that's good. So we would start with this. Ken Jones stole this slideshow from me, and he's been using it now, and I think he used it when he was up at the state emergency management place, so that's awesome. We would go over our agenda was always go over the action plan and go over a recovery plan. About halfway through, we started asking our sections to tell us how they were going to recover, what they needed to stand down, what they needed to do to recover. We'd go through the document. We'd go through our operational details. We'd go through our recovery plan. I'd call in all of the respective chiefs to go over their section and highlight anything that needed to be highlighted. And then we would conclude. When we would conclude a sit rep, usually it was words from Unified Command. Eric Kersko would talk to us a little bit. City Administration, Steve or Aaron Parrish would talk to us. And then the mayor, Kim Norton, would usually have a nice concluding message for us. And so we would do that every day for a while. Then we went down to twice a week. And then we would go over our purpose, because it was very important to remind people why we did this, because usually one of the questions every single time was, why do we have to report on this so often? And yeah, the reason is so you're informing the oncoming shift, going over the current situation, the objective, the assignments. And then we would meet once weekly at Wednesday, 9:30. And the deadline was always 11:30, and no one ever made that deadline. We'd always have to email them and be like, where's your stuff? And then that was our action plan review. And then we would always conclude with Unified Command, Eric Kersko, would always have some information for us and that kind of thing. But it was really fun, actually. I found it to be, everybody's under a lot of stress, and everybody's doing a lot of stuff, and but this process keeps everybody moving in the same direction, keeps everybody organized. The other nice thing is that this process works really well with FEMA's paperwork. So now we don't have to do as much heavy lifting for the paperwork.
You had mentioned the day center, Andrew.
Yeah.
at Mayo. Could you give us some more information as far as how many people are being served, and there are enough people that they're actually going to refurbish some more buildings to provide housing?
Yeah, so their numbers, I think their highest numbers have been in the mid 70s of people that they've served. The warming center also moved to the Mayo Civic Center too. So people that are there during the day, and then they have beds to sleep in at night right there. And they have housed so many people. Like the first day I helped stand up the day center, and the first day there was a lot of people that I recognized from the library, and that was one of the reasons we needed the day center, because the library had to close. There was a lot of people I recognized. Today when I was there, all of those people have been housed, so now it's a completely different group of folks, and it just makes me feel really good to know that the library and the city gets to help out in that way, because people experiencing homelessness, like, so many of them have like a mental health issue, and if they can just get on the right medication and get a little bit of help, you'll never see them again in a homeless situation, because that's what they needed. They just needed a little bit of help. We've done this training at the library from a gentleman who runs a homeless shelter in Chicago called his name is Ryan Dowd, and in the training he talked about the three types of homeless folks. There's people that they'll be a homeless one time in their life, and they just have like one issue to figure out. And if you figure that issue out, they'll never be homeless again. There's people that have multiple issues to figure out, and they're kind of in a longer stage of homelessness. But if you help them navigate that and you give them a little help, they'll never be homeless again. And then there's the third type of homeless person that's they're not able to work at all, and they are in some ways not able to take care of themselves for whatever reason, if it's health reason or anything like that. And so, yeah, they at the day center, we saw all of that kind of stuff, and it's just really great to see the folks that are in those first two categories to get the help they need and to be able to get them housed. That third group is really difficult, but even them, we're able to help out sometimes by getting them hooked up with programs that so that they're not food insecure. They get the medications they need. Yeah, so it's really nice to be a part of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the COOP as far as about creating a lot of forms to, what kind of forms are you creating for COVID data? What kind of data are you looking for?
So one of the reasons that I am particularly suited to talk about this issue is because the data that we see is not for the public, right? I have a terrible memory, so I cannot tell you any of the precise data that I looked at. So there's no danger of me spilling the beans on any top secret data, but I can assure you that all of the data is very boring. The kinds of stuff that we looked at R-Knots. We wanted specific data on Olmsted County, like what our R-Knot looked like. The last I looked, it was 1.09, so just a little bit over 1, which is good news. If we get the R-Knot below 1, it means the disease is petering out. Right now, it's basically the level of infection will probably stay this level of infection. If it's about 1, that's what that means. Or that's what the guy told me. I don't know if it actually means that. But yeah, so it's number of hospital beds, number of ICU beds, number of people infected, number of people who have been treated, number of people that have gotten tested. And the other thing is like the people that are making decisions, it's our job to make that data to present it in a way that they can actually make heads or tails of it. So if it's a pie chart and they're like, this doesn't make sense to me, we get to figure out how to make it into like a graph chart or something like that. But for the most part, the way people make a lot of decisions is they make those decisions by talking to other communities in the area and seeing what they're doing, that kind of thing. Or they will ask us for impossible pieces of data that we can't get in any way, shape, or form. And I learned very quickly that in a EOC environment, You don't say, nah, I can't get that for you, sorry. You say, I'll do my best. It's very hierarchical, and I'm not used to working in that environment. Like at the library, if Audrey tells me to do something, I'm like, that doesn't sound right. I go to Audrey and I say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain why we're looking for this? Whatever, whatever. And the EOC thing, it's much more, they tell me to jump and I'm supposed to ask how high, but I'm not good at that. Like in all of the meetings with the chief, John and Holly would call him Chief and I would call him Eric. And then I stopped getting invited to meetings.
I know that people have to have an emergency plan. And I'm not sure what the acronym is, but and for tornadoes and things like that, or fires. But is this long term, because we really haven't had such a long term, so now is the next requirement that all businesses and schools or whatever have this long term emergency operation?
That's kind of what the COOP plan is. The continuity of operations is a longer term thing, but it's really, it's like if the community flooded, you know, like in Iowa, in Rapid City had a flood, and that's what a COOP plan is supposed to take care of. Like it's going to be weeks to months, but eventually you're going to get back there. With COVID, the hardest thing is we don't know the timeline. So that's one of the things I could see them changing in like a next version of NIMS and ICS, and is changing the timelines, making people think longer. And yeah, pandemics, nobody had that. You didn't really have that on our radar for like, we had a tornado plan, we had a flood plan, threat plan. We did not have a pandemic plan at the library.
Yeah. Strange time.
Andrew, you probably have you'll have probably your 14th page of acronyms after the pandemic acronyms come out. So.
Absolutely. I'm hoping for at least, we get up to at least page 20 with these. Exciting times.
The food response, because Beth, you probably know about that too, but the food drop, could you just elaborate on that just a little bit, what that means?
They were able to get a bunch of partners together to donate food to folks that were food insecure, and it was a really cool event. Like the mayor was there, and Cindy Steinhauser, the head of community development, she was moved to HHS, Health and Human Services, and I took her spot in planning, but she was there, and we knew with people not being able to work, so many people getting laid off, we knew that people needed help, and we knew a lot more people were food insecure that had never been food insecure before, and that was a cool thing to be part of. I was only involved in the paperwork part of that, and I just saw the plans, and I just said, that looks good. But I saw the pictures and stuff of everybody helping out, and that was really cool. They helped a lot of people. It was 2 or 3 drops, I think, that they've done, maybe even more. And we still have Channel 1 still comes to the day center and does food drops there too.
And Beth, I know for community food response, do you have an increase of people coming by, or is it?
Mute here. Okay. So we're seeing, that we have 2 sites and we're only open at one of them. Right. So we are seeing about as many as we would normally see at Bethel, which is our bigger site, about 200 people a night, which means about 600 meals. And at the exchange, we usually feed about 100 and a quarter, 130 or so. So we're getting some of the Bethel people, but some of those Bethel people do not have a way to get to us, and are getting fed by some of those other programs that Andrew was talking about.
So that's good. Yeah, because I was, it's amazing how it's still hard to believe so many people are food insecure. So thank goodness there are organizations that are helping.
Yeah,
that's right. I thought it was a great presentation, Andrew. I certainly learned some acronyms already I didn't know myself. So, and even though now with the EOC, so when somebody mentions it, I can at least say, hey, I know what that is.
Yeah.
So So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I am always willing to talk about pretty much anything. Just give me a subject and I can talk.
That's helpful. Beth, again, thank you for what you've done for the community and for the community food response, and congratulations on your Paul Harris Fellowship. That's a great honor for Rotarians, and we're happy to share that now with you. So I did have one more thing I thought I'd leave with those of us that are members still out that are on the call. I just, and I meant to put this on our agenda, but there's not a lot of us on the call today, but I thought those that are here, if you can maybe just think of somebody that maybe you haven't seen online, since we've been doing our meetings this way for almost 3 months now, or somebody that last time you were at Rotary that you sat next to at lunch and you haven't talked to since then. Maybe you can reach out to them, either shoot them a quick email if you have their email address, or give them a phone call or something like that, just to check in with them and see how they're doing. That would be great, just to try to branch ourselves out a little bit more and try to connect with people, and just try to keep ourselves connected, our hands crossed a little bit to our Rotary friends if we can. So hopefully we'll be able to be back and start meeting face to face here soon, maybe at the hotel, but we'll have more information on that when we have it. So, well, thank you, everybody. Again, thanks, Beth. Thanks to Andrew for participating and presenting. And I hope everybody has a great day, unless anybody has anything else. Thanks, Patricia and Doug and everyone else.
I was just going to say, we've recorded the meetings, so they're all out on the YouTube page.
That is awesome. Great. That's a good job, Doug. I didn't know we had those all recorded. So that's great. Wow, that looks great. Thanks for putting that up there. So that hopefully we can continue to do that with this medium. So
Thank you.
awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.